Hey everybody, Melissa Mackenzie here, publisher of the American Spectator, joined with my co-host, Scott McKay, contributing editor to the American Spectator. This is the Spectacle Podcast, and today we have a very special guest, our longtime friend, or at least a longtime friend of mine, and I think Scott's too, is Ron Coleman, the legendary conservative attorney who at one time was the only guy in the conservative space who knew things about the digital world, and was the guy who I have relied on for years whenever I've needed help or had a question. Ron's always been ready with an answer. So welcome, Ron. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you very much, and I will repeat what I have said when you were on my show, and whenever the American Spectator comes up, I am a creature, a creation of the American Spectator. I started reading it when I was in high school, back, when it was being chiseled, in granite, and it had such an incredible effect on my way of seeing the world. I felt so vindicated, and it's a real honor to be on this program and to see you guys again.
Well, it's good. It's good to have you. I mean, that was certainly the story for me too. Before I came to the American Spectator, like I was a huge fan of Armit Terrell Jr. because I read the magazine right out of somebody gave me a copy of the magazine and then gave me a subscription to it for my birthday, which tells you what kind of nerd I was in my teenage and in early 20s. And then of course I absolutely love Ben Stein and would go to the back of the magazine and read his column first and then
They
go
both
back.
affected my writing style to this day. I still hear the voices.
Mm,
Ben, you can't really, only Ben could write like Ben,
right.
but you know, just such a great thing that Amp Spec is still around.
Well, I'd
Yeah,
like to
well,
think
this
so.
this was the first thing that American Spectator was the first publication I ever subscribed to with my own money. So
Mm.
I guess all three of us can can claim a long lineage as readers of the magazine before having anything to do professionally. So that's great.
Yep, it was. I listened to Rush, I read the American Spectator, and I read the Wall Street Journal. And I don't know, and that was as a college student. So, I mean, that tells you how completely nerdy I was all going
You're
over
not going to move. You're not going to move me on this. I mean, I would, I mean, my wife always jokes, gosh, what if we would have got to college together? I said we would have never met each other because you were in the library all the time. I'm used to hanging around with nerds.
Well, okay, so you're in the right place here. So what we wanted to talk to you about is, of course, October 7th changed the world in a way, certainly changed the Middle East, and certainly changed things for Israel. And the war has been going on now for a while, and a big portion of Hamas has been kind of decimated, and the infrastructure is being that has supported them, like the underground tunnels and everything else, is being destroyed. And it feels like we're getting close to an end game here. And I was wondering about the other side of this. So Israel's going to win totally and completely. I mean, in for penny, in for pound. It seems like at this point, like where in past they had pulled their punches. This seems like like that they're going to go all the way with it. But what happened um, at the end, and what do things look like in Gaza after this?
Very difficult question, but let me, as I'm wont to do, challenge the question a little bit,
Okay.
because I don't think much changed except the widespread perception of reality. People who have been familiar with Hamas and familiar with Gaza and familiar with this dispute and the passions and prejudices that underlie it have known about what became so brutally clear to us on October 7th for a very, very long time. What I did see was more than ever two things. More people who came around to the view that, okay, I get it. I get it. These people are not amenable to being negotiated with. And what we saw was that a very, very large percentage of people who might have been your neighbors, my neighbors, colleagues, social media friends, have black hearts. People we thought we shared a worldview with suddenly found it within them to rationalize phenomenally brutal crimes. It was very revealing. It was so that, yes, the world has changed, but mostly in the nature of transparency and people sort of showing what they're really about. Now, to answer your question, which I still think is the same question, I don't know. I'm a lawyer in Newark. Okay. I've been to Israel a few times. All my children have studied in Israel. They're all adult children now. They studied as rabbinical students in neighborhoods of Jerusalem that would not have been affected by any of this in any meaningful way. Everyone where I live in an Orthodox Jewish enclave called Passaic Clifton, down Route 21, a couple miles or up, is very acutely aware of what's going on and what's been going on since we got word on the Jewish holiday of Simchas Torah that something terrible had happened in Israel. And I know many, many parents of children who are serving in the Israel Defense Forces. It does seem, as you have observed, Melissa, that Israel is going to do the responsible thing by its citizens this time around and hardly pull any punches. I mean, if at one point somebody who I consider to be a friend and sympathetic said, well, this has just reached the point of indiscriminate, carpet bombing at this point, and that's preposterous. This is not what that looks like. But without getting into the details, yes, they're playing for keeps. There isn't going to be any of this, partners for peace stuff. I understand that what Israel is doing is clearing a 5-kilometer buffer zone inside the Gaza side of the border, which is going to probably be very intensely secured. That is a tactical answer to the problem, but it isn't a strategic one or a political one. What do you do with an entire population? And it's not just about Hamas. Yes, you can find many, many videos of everyday Palestinians criticizing Hamas. Be that as it may, this is a population that is thoroughly determined not to live in peace with Jews in this part of the world. There doesn't seem to be an answer to that problem because we are moderns. So we will not, notwithstanding the accusations that are routinely made against the state of Israel, we will not annihilate that population and raise that civilization such as it is and salt the earth. It's just something we don't do anymore. other people do it, usually Muslims doing it to other Muslims. Nobody really cares about that. I don't I don't know what that solution looks like. I don't think anyone does. So also it may very well be that all you have is tactical solutions.
Well, I mean,
Conversation killer, I know.
well, the thing is I think that's a pretty realistic response, and Gaza isn't the only, part of their territory that they're really having to defend and deal with. They've got, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and so this is a wider scope. One thing that I feared was that this could draw in the whole Middle East into some sort of conflict. And unlike in the 70s, Israel's neighbors are far better trained, armed, and, it would be a different game. One of the things, and I kind of wanted to get your opinion about this, is that the Abraham Accords, which it seems like the Biden administration has done everything in their power to undo, and I kind of feared would be undone by this whole thing. Some of Israel's former frenemies, because there were, they had to, if they were friendly, they were on the down low, and if but the signatories on the Abraham Accords, and then the other countries who were friendly to the agreement have been very restrained. And Egypt is like fortifying its border and with Gaza. And so nobody really wants the Gazans to come their direction. I'm talking about other Muslim populations. And
other than the Houthis, who are lunatics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and look, we're really talking about pre-modern civilizations here. They might be able to work modern weapons, but they simply have left, or not they left behind. They have no concept of modern civilization in any of the mores of conduct or worldview. And I'm not such a modern. I studied and live by the words of medieval rabbis, okay? But yes, on the other hand, I do use technology. Fine. I understand. I think your point is very well taken that Egypt is is in many ways more of a threat than it was in 1973. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, the military there has concluded quite rationally that it doesn't make sense for them, and then nor do they have any particular benefit in the absence of pan-Arabism,
right?
Which is not a thing. It's simply not a thing. And
they tried that and it didn't work too well.
It didn't work well, and you don't have that kind of Ba'athist party, figurehead that and which was a Marxist ideology, except for its nationalist aspect. These people were leftists. The Arab world is, the relatively civilized parts of the Arab world are really trying to get on with not being impoverished. And the really poisonous thing, there's the Abraham Accords, but there's also obviously the phenomenal and bizarre obsession that the Obama wing of the Democratic Party, which controls it and which controls the government, their obsession with Iran, because that is, the struggle for the hearts and minds of people, Arabs and non-Arabs in the Muslim world, largely in the Near East, is between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And a lot of conservatives and liberals have to stop looking at Saudi Arabia as if it were 1984 and we're arguing over the AWACS. It is a gigantic, it's a different world. And they have been de facto allies of Israel for a very long time. They share many, and also, as you observe, Melissa, people have really had it with the radical Palestinians. I mean, why Qatar continues to put up with it, I guess it's because they've got still a radical orientation. But the South, they've dumped a lot of money on these people. It's gone into their pockets. It's gone into tunnels and weapons. There's really a desire in, I think, a large part of this world to move into the 21st century, if not in terms of social mores, but economically and even to some extent politically. These really charismatic dictators, whether it's pan-Arabism or otherwise, they're not there anymore. You have these military regimes. What is an interesting problem is Lebanon. But the reason, Lebanon has become a pretty nasty place. I mean, it's been a fairly nasty place for a very, very long time since we were children, and it was once really like a Garden of Eden. They have gotten rid of or sent underground what had formerly been the Christian community there. Mm. And there's really no offset to the Hezbollah/Iran influence in that country. On the other hand, it's not so bad. And this again reminds me of the Egypt situation. One of the images that was making the rounds on social media last week was of someone in Lebanon opened a store. I don't know whether it was an electronics store or some consumer store that was called October 7th. Okay. And everybody, was passing this around like, well, these people are freaking animals. I mean, this is their idea. And remember, Lebanon is overwhelmingly Palestinian. Let's also remember that the Transjordan, which is the part of the country, the part of the world that was the British mandate, is mostly Lebanon. Mm-hmm. So evidently the Lebanese government, which has not been particularly cooperative with Israel in recent years, the way they had been even in the past, they made these people change the name of that store. It wasn't a good look for them. That means that there's a sensibility outside of Iran mm-hmm. that didn't exist before. And another thing that has changed since the 70s is that we are no longer living in a great power, in a bilateral great or a bipolar great power world. The Russians really aren't a concern. And China is not really a concern. Yes, they can ship and sell weapons. Yes, they can harass, but they don't. Neither Russia's got its hands quite full. And China is, I think, much more interested in what's going on in the South China Sea. Yes, would they like to undermine any opportunity for the United States to assert or reinforce hegemony? Yes, they would, and so would the Biden administration. Frankly, that is more of a problem than China is Washington.
Now, do you think that, so Thomas Massey came out and said that he wouldn't be voting for a stripped down aid package for Israel. And I think it was Podhoretz who said that he was a raging anti-Semite. And I was wondering what you were thinking about there's some, and this, I'm seeing this on the right, it's certainly on the left, but the left, I feel like, is wholly anti-Semitic. So that's just a, and it's finally just out there, which is, to me, that this is shocking to anybody is just annoying, because it has been so obvious for so long. The institutions, one of my daughter's friends was a student at Berkeley, and basically agnostic, but Jewish in heritage, and had to keep his head down low, and in a supposedly liberal school. I mean, it's gotten so bad. Anyway, and this was some years ago, but I'm wondering about the kind of let Israel take care of Israel. They're a wealthy country. America is in debt. America should be taking care of itself. All of this money going to foreign adventures, yada, yada. What do you think about that argument?
I think it has some merit. The thing to remember about Thomas Massey is that I think it was someone from MSNBC, which, like a stop clock, is going to be right a couple times a day, is a performative contrarian. He's trying to make certain points that are easy to lose, and it's not so different, frankly, from what Rand Paul has historically done. But when you decide to make such moves, to be consistent, and Ron Paul, I think, actually, was more so than Rand Paul, it comes to a certain amount of risk. There actually is a point of view among supporters of Israel that Israel should get off the teat of the United States. That it doesn't really need to be as dependent on the U.S. financially, and it's not so dependent on the U.S. financially, but that it ought to wean itself away, give it, and remove leverage that the U.S. has over it, which would be a favor probably for all concerned. I don't like the idea that anyone who, first of all, the intellectual premise that you don't have to be that a failure to be pro-Israel doesn't make you an anti-Semite is, in its pristine abstract sense, true. We do, however, find that those who are anti-Israel are readily demonstrated to be anti-Semites almost to a man.
Right.
But it isn't. I think there's a lot to be said for reforming that relationship from a pro-Israel point of view. In terms of the money thing, I mean, I think that is a red herring. Frankly, money is spent by this government. There are no budgets anymore. The executive branch just writes checks. It sends money. I mean, we're talking about a much bigger problem than that. I don't think, it's not as if we don't have the money for the reason that we're not sending money to the border. It has nothing to do with money.
Right.
It has to do with an entirely different political agenda, which is to not enforce immigration law. It has got nothing to do with money. But when money is on the table, when money is being discussed and money is being given out, it does make you a target. And guess what? Every taxpayer is entitled to question where his money is being spent.
Ron, would you say that well, let me phrase it this way. I mean, it would seem like what the Israelis have always needed from the American government was not so much money, but diplomatic cover to do what they needed to do in Gaza, particularly after October 7th. And we're talking about sending money to Israel because that diplomatic cover has not been as forthcoming as perhaps it could have been when you have the Biden administration, continuously kind of ankle biting at the Israelis about tactics and, oh, we don't want to see civilians and maybe we should have a ceasefire and all this other different stuff. When what they could have said is, look, if this is it, go get them and just leave it. And try and finish this as fast as you can, but we're gonna stay out. We're gonna keep everybody else out.
Scott, my opinion on this is that the United States government has been just about as supportive of Israel as could possibly be expected if the U.S. were to maintain any credibility with the rest of the world as not being controlled by Israel's interests. I mean, let's remember James Baker, Secretary of State. Okay, the Bush and Reagan years, the criticism for the Iraqi nuclear reactor attack. This has been pretty muted stuff. Yes, as I was saying what I was about the financial piece, and as you point out, it's not so much the money, but the money does have a useful purpose, which is that it gives the impression that the Americans are exerting. There's sort of I know that you know that I know that you know kind of thing going on here. Are the Americans really exerting pressure? Is there a belief that it would be worse if the Americans weren't? Again, it really does make a very big opening for Israel's biggest critics, let's be as neutral as possible, to say, we're giving them money, so we should also be exerting pressure on them. Fine, but it is a very complicated operation and a complicated, you're 100% right, Scott. It's about, it's about the role of the United States, and it's very, it's complicated because there's this narrative about colonialism, right? Which we didn't hear about in the old days. In the old days, it was Arabs versus Jews. Then colonialism, cultural Marxism, became part of every left-wing narrative. And it has been very, very gleefully latched onto for use in this dispute, which is irony beyond irony, because how did these Palestinians get there? Was it by, did God, is that where God placed them after the Tower of Babel? I don't think so.
Right.
Arabs rule the entire Middle East, not because the Middle East is Arabia, but because of colonialism. Again, yes, we are seeing different masks being donned to very, very thinly disguise what really is anti-Semitism, but it's also anti-Americanism. These two track each other, and I learned this in the American Spectator many, many years ago. Mm-hmm. These two consistently track each other. You'll never find one without the other. And anyone who tells you, I'm America first, but I don't like Israel, follow the trail. See what it is that when they mean to say America first, what it is they consider America. These are not patriots. Can you be critical of Israel and be a patriot? Yeah, you can. But you can't be an anti-Semite and be a patriot, because inevitably anti-Semites believe in conspiracy theories Rothschild nonsense, and which inevitably means that you don't really even believe that the government is in any way a democratic government, and it's the Fed and the
Well,
all
and
this.
the key thing is that it's something that Ron Paul said a long time ago, which is that racism is collectivism, and that's also true of anti-Semitism. These are people that are collective thinkers.
Yeah, and this yes, group group guilt is savagery.
It is.
Group guilt is savagery, and it's a gigantic part of everything. And as you guys both know, I'm very active on Twitter, and I'm constantly seeing people talk about the Jews, or in its more pernicious form, the Jew. By the way, I'm the Jew.
You don't even get the S, right?
Okay, because that's an echo. That's an echo of Mein Kampf. Okay, the Jew. What do you mean the Jew? You mean some Jew? Some Jew took your girlfriend away, so now it's the Jews. It's this whole concept of look at all these people who are in media who are Jews. You think these people and that being Jewish has any meaning whatsoever to these people?
Right.
And what they're inevitably talking about is some kind of racial connection, which is a kind of Nazi way of looking at the world. And as you say, it's collectivist. It denudes people of their personhood, and then their individuality and their liberty. It's a great point. I don't recall hearing it in the name of Ron Paul before.
Yeah, well, and it's of course this is something, and I guess I can tease it. I was on your podcast a little while ago, and it's gonna.
Which one will come out first?
Yeah, and we talked a lot about because I wrote the book about Obama, Racism, Revenge, and Ruin, and that collectivist thinking. If you want to talk about the Obama Democrats, like this is probably the single most descriptive feature of their politics is collectivist thinking. And with what you're saying, I think you've given me something to think about here, because the anti-Semitism that you do get from so many in that administration and so many within that movement, you see it on the college campuses and all the rest of this stuff. I don't know. Maybe collectivist thinkers are inevitably going to be anti-Semites.
I don't know about that, because okay, so Ron, I don't know if you read it, but I wrote something that was somewhat controversial and had both of our main editors, Vladi Plazhinsky and Seth Foreman on the weekend. They're both Jewish, but one of heritage more so and one religiously as well. But anyway, and I had them look at it before I published it. But one of the things that I think has come up in regard to this that concerns me, being someone who loves Israel, being someone who loves Jewish people, obviously, is that so much of what has been taught on college campuses and so much of the ideology that we're discussing here of this kind of breaking down of structures and critical theory, going back to theories brought into America during World War II, were predominantly by Jewish professors talking about and dividing people down based on their power structures, which is a communist, or however you want to say it, way of thinking. And then now are kind of going, well, wait a minute, we're oppressed too. And when they're being viewed now by, all across the country, we're seeing these Hamas protesters, a bunch of people I don't think I've ever seen, who are going after, Jewish people as being the white oppressor. And so the very people who taught some of this theory, many of them Jewish, on college campuses, not all, of course, are protesting against this and not saying that we need to get rid of this division, but saying Jewish people need to be re-looked at as a co-oppressed class of people.
Yes, what a disastrous proposal that is. It fails on so many levels. You have a problem here with, the definition of Jewishness.
Right.
So very, very, very few, if any, of the people that you're referring to, who are these collectivists, had Jewish sensibilities. They might have Jewish sensibilities in the sense of they think like Jewish people, but their moral, much less religious frame of reference was not Jewish. They replaced Judaism with collectivism, usually with Marxism. And Marx was a Jew who wrote very, very awful anti-Semitic stuff. These people now, let's think of the intellectuals, the mid 20th century intellectuals, who had made up so much of the faculties in the elite institutions. They were not obviously anti-Semites in the eliminationist sense, but they were contemptuous, usually, of traditional Jewish religion and society.
Right.
Today's Jewish members of the elite, some of whom are in academia, but many, many more of whom are in the worlds of business and media, are a gigantic part of the problem, because it's not only that they don't care about being Jewish, but it's in fact the opposite. The fact that they're Jewish, and this was also true of that generation, that earlier generation, the fact that they're Jewish makes them believe that in order to prove their bona fides as collectivists or as liberals, that they must be critical of Jews. So you have the New York Times, which has consistently made the destruction, the media destruction of the phenomenally successful Orthodox Jewish community in the New York area, which, while paying the same taxes as everyone else, maintains its own set of schools and its own social organizations, and which is phenomenally uninvolved in crime and most social ills. The New York Times can't stand this. The New York Times is an institution very, very largely informed by Jews who want to prove how good they can be at being critical of Jews. And that's to a large extent also, all these phony Jews, and I say phony, I don't know whether or not they are literally Jewish or not. Most people under 50, if the last name is Jewish, their mothers probably aren't Jewish, because the intermarriage rate exceeds 50%, going back now, a good generation. I don't want to get into that at all. But yes, you're pointing out this to a large extent, and I've written on this. Jews have brought the American Jewish community has brought this on itself. Look at the Biden White House. Look at the Anti-Defamation League. Listen, when anti-Semites tell me the Jews are responsible for all the immigrants that have been let into European countries, come on. You killed every single Jew in Europe.
Right. That's a terrible argument.
And you're able to identify a couple of people who went back, rebuilt communities, and then became, stupid ass liberals who were in favor of refugee. These are democratic countries, okay? They make the decisions they want to make. And if the Europeans are so baffled morally that they associate guilt over the Holocaust with letting North African immigrants into their countries to ravage a civilization, I can't do anything about that, but don't blame that on the Jews.
Right.
But in the United States, where Jews have achieved prominence and have escaped the worst persecution, there is an identity crisis. And what is going to have to happen is, it might not happen during my lifetime, but it's in the process of happening, which is that people who are meaningfully identified as Jews are going to be those who are living Jewish lives, because we are outstripping the assimilated Jews in every conceivable demographic, and that's going to clarify a lot of things.
Well, I think that's a great point, because and this is true on the Christian side as well. The religious observant, both Christians and Jews, are the ones that are having babies, whereas the secularized folks, the post-Christians and the post-Jewish, simply are not. And so, without the cultural forces that turn the kids of observant Christians and Jews into secularized versions of those subcultures, I guess, there aren't going to be any more of these people. And of course, that has something to do with why the schools are so vigorous in destroying your kids. And it has something to do with why the New York Times can't stand the Orthodox Jews in New York with their schools that do not indoctrinate people into. Yeah, I mean, it all fits together, obviously.
And you know what else those schools don't do? They don't send kids to the Ivy League, even though their average IQ in those schools, I guarantee you, is given what Harvard and Yale are now accepting.
Right.
Believe me. But we're not interested. Listen, I went to Princeton and Northwestern. My children aren't getting anywhere near campuses like that. They're all phenomenally intelligent. Their mother has credentials like mine. They're accomplished rabbinical scholars and educated and literate in secular studies. It's a new era. We're not buying into the same elite institutions and symbolism. And the amazing thing about that is that, not the amazing thing, but that is also part of that resentment from the New York Times, because we're building, much the way many other subcultures are building, we're building alternatives to these social systems that have so failed us and so let us down. For all the talk about what this or that minority has done to undermine American culture, some of which may have a great deal of merit, it's the majority that was supposed to be the gatekeepers, that was supposed to value its own heritage, and that has let the barbarians into the gate.
No question about it.
Well, what you're talking about how the Orthodox are creating their own institutions, it's happening in the Christian world too. And it's happening. It's the interesting
and higher education as well.
And higher education as well. And what I've seen, like with my, the friends of like my daughter, who were all brilliant, right? Like, but because they were white, because they were male, because they were Christian or agnostic or whatever, they were not. The Ivy didn't want them anyway. Like they'd look at the zip code these kids were from and wouldn't want them. And so, but what's happening is these kids are getting full ride scholarships to state schools. And so like the riches of some of these other schools, and then parents are starting, and individuals are starting new schools. So like there's a lot of like classical education, both in higher ed and primary schooling. I just heard of, and it's happening lower too. This is like, I was so excited about this. Over in Austin, they're starting a Catholic Montessori school. Well, I love Montessori. It's just a wonderful program. Well, to have that and have it specifically, tailored to a Catholic worldview, that's wonderful. I'm all for it. And this is happening throughout education. I think to your point, Ron, a generation from now, America looks very different because not only are the truly Orthodox, whether they're Christian, Jewish, or whatever, out breeding everybody, but they're also intellectually changing the world, and it's the seeds have been planted, and it's going to come to fruition in this next generation.
And what a lot of people don't appreciate also, there has been this really repulsive policy decision to flood our country the way Europe has been flooded with people from cultures that are utterly unlike ours,
right,
and whose values and whose sensibilities are unlike ours, and who have no interest in assimilating. And fine, these people are they going to ruin our country the way they are ruining France and Germany and the UK? I don't know, but I do know it isn't so clear. All the Hispanics, and these are people are overwhelmingly not Hispanics. Latinos in this country, a generation after really major population influxes have taken place, they're still not meaningfully in positions of leadership and power. You can't, numbers alone won't do it. You need to have cultural institutions and traditions and an individual achievement, going back to our earlier point, that gets you. Yes, you can name your token judges and your cabinet positions to people to make it for diversity. But at the end of the day, real leadership comes from real achievement. And in the face of the lack of achievement, what we see in the traditionally elite institutions is, well, we're not going to recognize achievement anymore.
right.
We're just going to wish it away. That's a short-term strategy for rent, for rent seeking,
Right.
but it doesn't actually build you a society. It destroys the society. And at the end of the day, quality should out, but for one thing, and the wild card is, how much will violence and disorder and the utter collapse of the urban centers of our country, how much will that make it impossible to continue doing business for anyone?
Right.
Well, that is
you have to have some semblance of a civil society before a true meritocracy can take place.
Exactly.
And we've seen that in blue city after blue city over the last 50 years, where unless it's kids that can shoot 3-pointers or dunk or run a 4.3 40. I mean, it's really hard to spot a great deal of meritocracy in these urban collectivist settings.
Right.
You fill those places up with a bunch of illegals who, like you said, are in poorly poised to assimilate, put it that way. And you don't have institutions strong enough to overcome that. What you're not going to see is social mobility. You're going to see the entire thing get dragged down, which is, everybody who sees that, obviously, or everybody who pays attention sees that. And I think the people that are foisting it on the country see it. They actually think they benefit from it, which is why it's being done. you know, these people are not. I mean, the Biden administration and the people behind the Biden administration who have pushed this for 25 years, they know what the effect is. They've seen it in Europe. But you know, they look at this as, okay, these people are ready-made voters that we'll be able to do. Plus, it's the Cloward-Piven strategy that we can put in place, which is that we're going to break down this society and we're going to create the need and the vacuum for something else that we will be able to control. Thing is they won't be able to control it because it's going to be uncontrollable.
Right.
You know, so.
Well, I mean, the dream, I think, amongst Western elites, both in Europe and in America, and I just wrote about this week, is they looked fondly at what China did during the COVID lockdown, where each person is controlled completely. And so if you have this view where you have a few elites running things, and Scott and I, a couple weeks ago or a week ago, or I'm losing track of time, did a podcast about the data coming out about the 1%, the elites, and how they view their fellow Americans.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, and it's absolutely frightening. And the conclusion one comes to is that what they would like is a dumb, desperate populace that's easily controlled, where someone brought out on Twitter today that, and I thought of Mao too, in Russia, they went after the farmers, right? And Mao did the same thing. One of my neighbors, they were family farmers, and the Maoists came and stripped them of their clothes, took their farm over, killed their dog in front of them, and they basically escaped with their lives. And then Mao starved the people. Like, that's a way to get control. And I'll push back just one little bit of thing, and we've gone way over time, but I was thinking about what has happened, because Texas is a majority country or state already. White people have been outnumbered for a long time now, and I say that, but what happens is, in the second and third generation of immigrants here, specifically in Central America and Mexican immigrants, is they stop viewing themselves as anything. They view themselves as white. Well, this has caused great dismay amongst the Democrats. And in addition, what we're also seeing is, and this happened during COVID, is any free-thinking people moved out of the cities because, literally the county line here, like Harris County and Montgomery County, was so dramatic. Like you could live free in the county I'm in, and truly 2 miles from me, you were like a slave. And so what people did is they sold their houses or rented their houses, and they moved up to Montgomery County. And that was Black, Hispanic, Asian, you name it. Everybody moved out who was free thinking. And
because going back to Scott's point, if we recognize that people do have individual agency,
exactly,
that they're not collective, that they actually are people who think for themselves, then giving them just the slightest bit of oxygen to do so, they will come around to the truth. And that's Michael Malice and the white pill.
Yeah. I think so. Well, that's on that note, I think we should stop. That's truly merit and viewing people as individualism. This is like the American ideal. That's what we need to go back to.
This podcast is the American ideal. Damn it.
It is the American ideal.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Ron.
Guys, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to seeing these millions of snippets that you're going to release.
Thank you for being with us.
Okay, catch you later.
See you soon, Ron.